What's up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Wraparound brought to you by the Hockey News. I'm your host, Emma Lingan. I am joined today by Michael Augello and Jim Parsons of the Hockey News. We are coming at you on this Thursday, as we always do, to talk about the latest and greatest storylines from around the NHL in bite-sized portions. But before we do, want to remind you that for over 75 years, the Hockey News has been the ultimate hockey fix. Now get 12 issues delivered straight to you, packed with stories, stats, and a bonus gift issue to kick things off. Head over to thn.com and get in on the action. All right, guys. Well, the big news we have to start with today, of course, is the Artemi Panarin trade. The Rangers traded him to the Los Angeles Kings in exchange for prospect Liam Greentree and a conditional third and fourth round picks, with the Rangers also retaining 50% of Panarin's salary, 11.6 million for the rest of the season. So the Kings announced after they had landed him in the trade a 2-year, $22 million extension for Panarin. Mike, I'll start with you. What do you think of the acquisition for the Kings? We've since learned that LA was the only destination that Panarin was going to approve a trade to. So from his perspective, that's one thing. But what do you think from the Kings' perspective? How does he fit on this roster? And do you think the Rangers got enough back in return?
Well, he fits on the Kings roster because they've been one of the most disappointing and underachieving offensive teams in the NHL for more than a few years. Right now, they have a negative 12 goal differential. They only scored 145 goals, and we've said for a while that they needed to infuse offense. And last year at the deadline, they added Andrei Kuzmenko, and then in the summer, Ken Holland bafflingly brought in guys like Cody Ceci and Joel Armia. So he didn't add offense. So it made sense for them going after Panarin. They have Kopitar's, this is his final year. He's going to retire. So that opens up a ton of cap space. So Panarin's contract simply makes up for what Kopitar was making. But I look at the situation here is that the Kings, Panarin's not a center, but he's an offensive driver, and he's going to really help them. I think they're still a little weak up the middle going forward without Kopitar, but it's a good deal for them. On the Rangers, I know a lot of Rangers fans are upset that that was all they got for Panarin, but he controlled this. This was Mitch Marner 2.0. There you go. I said his name again. Marner controlled that he wanted to go to Vegas, and the Leafs only got Nicolas Roy in return. The same thing here. Panarin didn't want to go to Seattle, couldn't go to Florida or Tampa because their caps were restricted, and wanted to go to LA, and he signed the extension. The Rangers got a really good prospect in Greentree and some draft picks, but I think the expectation was they were going to get a lot more for Panarin, and because Panarin only wanted to go to one team, that limited the return for the Rangers.
Jim, what do you think of the deal for both of these teams, the fit and then the return for the Rangers?
Well, I think when you're talking about it from a Rangers perspective, this is the only thing you could do, right? It was one of those situations where, and Michael addressed it, but I do believe the Kings probably, this is more of it kind of fell in their lap situation. Like, I think they looked at this, but I think they weren't probably super high on Panarin's list until the other ones like Florida and Tampa dropped out of the running. Because what we're hearing today is that he left potentially as much as $30 million on the table to go to LA, that he didn't want to go to Seattle, that Carolina was kicking around on this a little bit, that Utah was even in the running, but they offered more money potentially than the Kings. So I think Ken Holland, who wants to take swings here for the Kings, is in a division in the Pacific that is for the taking. There's a lot of teams that are not playing nearly as well as they should be playing, and it's maybe one of the weaker divisions in the NHL. The Kings had an opportunity here to do something on a relatively short term for less money than they probably thought it was going to take to get this done. Is Panarin the ideal fit? No, I think they needed a center, but they also needed offense. Holland wants to take a swing. The Rangers didn't have very many options. Panarin said, okay, well, the teams I'd like are out, and the teams I could go to, I'm willing to leave this much money on the table to go over here. Let's just do that. So I think all of those things combined sort of made this a perfect scenario for Holland and the Kings, that they just couldn't say no to it. I think any other situation, another year, 2 years, a little more money, I don't think it gets done. But I think because it's, cheap, it's 2 years, and all the other teams came and dropped out of the race, or Panarin wouldn't choose them. So for the Rangers, they got what they could get. I mean, that was the deal here. That's all they could get. For the Kings, it was kind of like well, we might as well, right? We've got a player who we know is going to score, who's going to produce offense, who we don't have to spend nearly as much money on as we thought we might if we were really in this thing with competing teams. So I think it was just a matter of all these things coming together at the right time and right place for the Kings to do it.
Well, Panarin, of course, the big trade this week, but not the only trade that we've seen, of course, with the roster freeze coming up ahead of the Olympic break. The St. Louis Blues actually traded Nick Bjugstad to the New Jersey Devils in exchange for a conditional 4th-round pick and a forward prospect in Thomas Bordeleau. So Bjugstad is 33 years old, has a year left on his contract beyond this season, is making $3.5 million. Devils, of course, currently without Jack Hughes. They need to add some center depth behind Nico Hischier. What else is new? Mike, what do you think of the trade here for both sides?
Bjugstad's an NHL player. This is his 7th NHL team. He has 6 goals right now in 36 games. He's a gap filler. He's a depth guy. He's not going to fill your number 2 center slot. He's not going to replace any sense of the offense that Jack Hughes provides, but he's a body. And I think it's encouraging in terms of teams that are going to be selling at the deadline that a team got a 4th-round pick and an AHLer in Bordeleau for Bjugstad, who's sort of a journeyman center. So, it plugs the hole. It gives them a big body up the middle. He's decent defensively. Jim would know he played a little bit for Edmonton a few years ago, but in terms of an impact move, it's not really that.
Jim, your experience having seen Bjugstad obviously moving around the league here, what do you think of this trade for both sides?
Yeah, I was a little surprised yesterday when we were watching for all these trades that we were hoping were going to happen before the Olympic freeze that he was the one player that came off the board first, right? It was kind of like, okay, we're thinking these big names, and then Bjugstad goes. So it was kind of a little surprising, but and Michael pointed out, having seen him come to Edmonton in a very similar style of deal at a deadline, he is a useful player. He's a depth center. He can play multiple positions, do multiple things. He's got a little skill, so he can score every once in a while. So it's not a shocker that St. Louis, who we know is probably going to be selling, and we're going to be talking about some of their names here in a little bit about might be on the go. Bjugstad going is not a shocker for me. There's always going to be a team or two that looks at a player like him and says, you know what, we could use this kind of depth. We could use this kind of versatility. We could use this kind of big body who can win faceoffs and do things that some of the guys maybe on our roster currently can't. And when you're looking at a team like New Jersey, who has some holes to fill, unfortunately, it sounds like Jack Hughes is going to be back in time for the Olympics. So that one maybe down the road here is going to be fine. But New Jersey's had some issues, and they want to make sure that they can get some parts in there and pieces in there to help this team see if they can make a run at it. So Bjugstad is not going to be a huge difference maker, but he is a useful player.
Well, you mentioned the Olympic break, and that is, starting after today, after Thursday, the roster freeze and just the break from NHL games while the players go over to Milan to play in the Olympics. This is obviously taking place of the traditional All-Star break, a little bit longer than the traditional All-Star break, which is why the schedule has been so funky in the NHL this year. But Mike, now that we're officially reaching this break, are there any teams, or which teams, I guess, do you think are going to benefit the most from having 2 or 2+ weeks off to reset and recharge for a big final push to the season? And then maybe the flip side of that, which teams do you think are going to be most upset that this break is coming when it is, because it might be killing any momentum they may be having?
Yeah, I think that a team that has a lot of age, like the Pittsburgh Penguins, even though they're going to have significant players like Crosby and Erik Karlsson going to the Olympics, overall, them getting 2 weeks of rest, they're all going to be going. I'm sure the Pittsburgh airport will be lined up with players heading for Aruba or Curacao or some sunny Caribbean destination. But an older team that gets that rest and gets refreshed with this schedule, I think is going to benefit. Another team like Washington, who doesn't have as many Olympians, a few Russian players, obviously they're not going to the Olympics. They might benefit, but like a team like Florida, who would benefit from it, but a lot of their players are going, so that would hurt them. Conversely, the teams that wish the break was not happening, the Columbus Blue Jackets, who have won 7 games in a row, they don't want to break. They want to keep going. I think Buffalo, in a sense, with their ridiculous record that's been, and I'm not ridiculous in the sense that they've, completely flipped the script in terms of where they were. They're firmly nestled in a playoff spot now. They wish that this wasn't happening, but it is, and it's going to be the big question after this break whether they can recapture the magic.
Jim, any other teams that you would add to that list?
Well, I'm probably a little biased because I'm in Edmonton, but the Oilers are a team that have badly struggled here over the last week and a half. They finally won 3 in a row the other week. Talked about it extensively until it happened. They were the last team in the NHL to have done it. Then they did it, and then they promptly went and lost 3 straight. And they have been terrible. They have not been a good team heading into this break, losing to Toronto, losing to Calgary. There were some comments made by Leon Draisaitl the other day just about how bad the team looks and using this break to kind of reassess and get everybody in order. And then there's some talk about coaching and how much they're on the hot seat and what they're going to do. So the Oilers need this break because they have not been good all season long, at least comparatively to other past seasons where they've been an elite team that has been dominant at times. Even when the Oilers have a decent record in the Pacific, they've not been dominant at all this season. So I think for them, this break comes at a perfect time. Most of their players are not going to the Olympics. Maybe you can call some of those things snubs, maybe not. But you've got McDavid, you've got Josh Szymanski, you've got Leon Draisaitl going. That's the only 3. So they're all going to be there back on the ice on the 17th of February, kind of working things out. The other one for me, I think, is maybe Toronto. This is a team that I think is going to reassess what they're going to do. I believe they're going to be sellers, but I don't know that they know exactly what they're going to sell and what they're going to sell those pieces for. And this break gives them a really good opportunity to kind of look at those players like a Bobby McMahon and go, what are we going to get for this person? And is it worth trading Bobby McMahon for less than maybe the first round pick we'd like to get out of this player? Can we not get that out for this player? They need that time to figure that out, right? So the fact that he didn't move before the break, and they have plenty of assets that they could potentially move, teams like that I think are going to be really good about the break too. The only other thing I would say, and I'll play others devil's advocate to Michael's point about which teams wish they weren't on the break. I don't know that any team honestly wishes they didn't have this break. I think the schedule has been so crazy and so condensed. Even teams that are going into it really hot can feel very confident about going into this break really hot, and they can talk to each other, and the roster can get together and go, we were really good heading into this break. Now we're resting. Now we're getting a chance to talk about how good we feel going into the break. And they probably should be able to come out of it with a lot of confidence that they wouldn't have otherwise had. And I think for teams that are on the bubble who maybe haven't made the playoffs before, like the Buffalo Sabres, it's really good to still have that rest. So I do believe that, yes, you'd like to be hot and keep playing while you're hot. But I think if you go into this break really confident about your game, the break's not going to hurt you. I think coming out of it, you'll feel really strong about how you can contend, and you'll probably pick up right where you left off.
Well, one individual player who's definitely going to be going into the break thinking about how well he's played and feeling confident in the way that he's played is Jake Sanderson. He had 17 points in 16 games during the month of January. He put together the second best offensive month by a Senators defenseman in franchise history, behind only Erik Karlsson. So pretty good company to be in there. Sanderson on pace to have career highs in goals and points this year. He's averaging just over 25 minutes of ice time per game with Ottawa this season. Mike, do you think that Sanderson is the most valuable player on the Senators right now?
When you have a top pairing defenseman like Sanderson who dominates play, you have to consider him one of the most valuable. But if you look at Ottawa right now, I think Tim Stützle is probably the most valuable. He's been consistent. He's their leading scorer. He's a center. Brady Tkachuk has been out for off and on. I mean, Sanderson is an offensive driver. He's a power play quarterback, but I honestly think that Ottawa wouldn't even be in the picture right now if Stützle wasn't providing the offense that he is. Sanderson is a great player. He's on the U.S. Olympic team, and I think he can grow from here, but I think Stützle is the most valuable player on that team right now.
Jim, agree or disagree?
I agree with some of that for sure. I think Stützle is definitely one of the players that's maybe the face of the Ottawa Senators right now that you're thinking, okay, he's going to be the driver that gets them in. But I think you also have to consider that you need that kind of defenseman. And at 21, Sanderson is going to become, if it's not this season, it'll be in seasons to come, that he is the most important piece of this roster. And when you put him in, categories with other top, defensemen, he may not be yet at that elite level like a Cale Makar or a Quinn Hughes or what have you, but he's right in that second tier for me. And I think he's probably going to move himself into the conversation of some of those other defensemen. So if he's not the most important piece to the Ottawa Senators right now, he certainly will be when it comes to the next year or maybe the year after, as they become, hopefully, for their sake, a regular playoff contender. So I think he's in the mix right now. Do I think he's the clear, obvious best player on the Ottawa Senators? Maybe not, but give it time. I think that's going to happen.
Well, we talked earlier about the roster freeze and looking at teams that are going to be looking to sell. And we already mentioned the St. Louis Blues. They've already traded one player. Looking ahead now to Robert Thomas. Elliot Friedman reported over the weekend that Thomas had a minor leg procedure, expected to be out through the Olympic break. He's in the third year of his 8-year deal with an AAV of $8.125 million, leads the Blues with 33 points through his 42 appearances this season. Friedman also mentioned trade rumors involving Thomas have been impacted by the news of his injury. He said that there aren't many teams in the NHL who are capable of offering what St. Louis might want to get in a trade for this player. So, Mike, in your opinion, what do you think is a reasonable asking price for Robert Thomas? And do you think he'll be traded this year?
I mean, we always hear St. Louis Blues players, whether it be Jordan Kyrou, whether it be Thomas, always Braden Shen last year, always put out on the market and then never traded. Now, the Blues are sort of mediocre this year. They're probably going to finish outside the playoffs unless they go on a magical run like they did last year. I'd be surprised if they trade Thomas. He's 26 years old. He's, for them, a number one center for probably a team or teams out there that would be interested in getting him. He probably would nestle in really nice as a number two center. But the price that's it's going to cost is probably the usual package for, and he's got term on his contract. So it's not like you're trading for a rental. The price is probably going to be an NHL player, a top prospect, and a first round pick. And right now, I don't think that's going to happen before the deadline. It might happen in the summer. But I mean, if I was St. Louis, I would not rush into trading Robert Thomas unless there's some underlying problem that he wants to get out of there.
Jim, what do you think?
Well, the talk of it equivalent of 3 first-round picks, it's a heavy price, right? But at the same time, you've got Robert Thomas, who is maybe and arguably the best center available this summer or this deadline. And the shortage of centers is very apparent in the NHL, right? So if Thomas is on the radar of a team who believes he can play in a potential first-line role, and to Michael's point, if he's probably a second-line center on a team that's contending, maybe you don't want to give up that kind of a package. But I do believe if they're not worried about his injury history, whatever team's looking at him, they like the idea of his contract being locked in at a number as the salary cap increases, that they're like, this is a pretty good investment for us. We believe he's going to be healthy. We like his number. He's going to be here for a while. I think you could find a team that is probably willing to give that up if they believe that he fits in the first or second line role and will be with them for the next several years at a number that they can afford and they like. So will St. Louis move Robert Thomas? I'm not really sure. There's a lot of talk about it, and potentially it could happen. You never know with the Blues. Doug Armstrong is the kind of guy that likes to do a lot of sending things out into the universe to see what sticks and what doesn't. But Robert Thomas is an interesting one for me. I believe Kyrie probably moves before Robert Thomas does. But I think that if you find the right mix of team that likes contract, team that likes the player, a team that isn't worried about his injury, you might be able to get that package for him.
You do kind of wonder how St. Louis is going to behave this year. With you got an exiting GM now who might be maybe a little bit more feel a little bit more free to start making the moves that maybe he wouldn't have before. So we'll see what happens there. Elsewhere in the Central Division, the Chicago Blackhawks also lots of pending UFAs that they could end up using as trade bait at the deadline this year. Guys like Nick Foligno, Jason Dickinson, Ilya Mikheyev, Sam Lafferty, Connor Murphy, Matt Grzelcyk. I mean, Mike, who do you see moving out for the Blackhawks at the deadline?
I would lean on the defenseman because Murphy's been there for a long time. They're all pending UFAs, as you said. But Grzelcyk had a really good offensive year last season and was signed late in the summer, which was strange because I know his numbers were sort of out of whack with what he normally did with Boston. But with the shortage of quality defensemen out there and teams who are going to make deep runs, always looking for that extra blue liner to put on the bottom pairing or have as a seventh defenseman. I mean, I think Murphy and Grzelcyk are better than that. I think they could be mid pairing or, fives or sixes. I would suggest that they probably are the ones that are definitely going to move. Of the other ones, I mean, Foligno is a leadership guy there, and so is Dickinson. Lafferty is moved all over the place, Pittsburgh, Vancouver, Toronto, Buffalo. He could be obtained for a mid-round pick. So I think of that group of six, I think half of them are going to end up getting traded.
Jim, do you agree or disagree with that?
No, I'm probably on the same page with that one. The interesting thing about this group for the Blackhawks is almost every player on it has somewhat of an interesting history when it comes to either not getting signed when they thought they would, going to another team and not panning out like they thought they would. There's a lot of stuff here. Age gaps, different things, different positions. If I'm going to pick one, I'm going to say it's Connor Murphy. I think there's probably a team out there that looks at him and says, you know what, that's a pretty useful guy for us. The numbers work. We can get him probably for a very little ask. The Chicago Blackhawks are not going to be asking for a ton for this player. So he seems like the kind of person who I would guess there's going to be a couple teams in on, and Chicago could probably sell and get something out of that deal. But the rest of those players, I just don't really know what the return would be. I think if you're moving those pieces, you're getting almost nothing in return for a lot of them. So they could go, but I would guess if I had to pick a player who might get you some kind of a return, it's probably Connor Murphy.
Well, we will see. They are definitely going to be one of the teams Chicago probably looking to sell here at the deadline. Another team a little bit more to the surprise, I think, of everyone in the league after last season is the Winnipeg Jets. Absolutely nothing has gone right for this team this season. They've now lost 18 out of their last 25 games. Mind you, this is the team that won the President's Trophy last year. They now sit in the basement, not only of their division, but of the league. They are now looking like they have a pretty good chance to pick at the top of the draft this year. So, Mike, when you look back at the offseason up until now, what do you attribute this to for the Jets? Why were they not able to replicate the same success this year? Obviously, we know they had the departure of Nikolai Ehlers in free agency, but do you attribute it all to that, or what else do you think could factor in here?
No, I don't think it's all Ehlers, although it's a factor. He was a dependable scorer. He had trouble staying healthy, but he was a dependable scorer. I think it's a combination of Lowry being hurt, and he was a leader on that team. Remember, I believe he scored the goal in Game 7 in overtime against St. Louis in the first round. He's their leader. And the fact that Hellebuck was injured and had his knee cleaned out, for 4 or 5, I think he was out for 4 or 5 weeks. You combine that with them just seeming to have a malaise at the beginning of the season, and then it sort of snowballed. I mean, you don't expect this team with this kind of quality and this group of players to lose like double digits in a row, and they did. So at this point, I believe they still have their first round pick. They're in the lottery if they do. So, I mean, that's one benefit here. And all their key players, Scheifele, Hellebuck, Kyle Connor, they're all still relatively young. So they could very easily bounce back next year, and I expect them to.
Young, and most of them locked up long term as well. So beneficial for Winnipeg. Jim, what do you make of what's happened to the Jets this season? Is this just a down year? Do you kind of see a deeper issue here with this team?
Well, I said it last time, I think, when we were on the video, that I didn't think the Winnipeg Jets were as good as they appeared to be last year. To me, they were not a President's Trophy winning team. Now they were a much better team than they are this season, but I think that was a little deceiving. So when you look at the team on paper now and you go, man, they've dropped so badly because they were the President's Trophy winner. I mean, you have to take that with a little bit of a grain of salt because I don't think they were that good last season. That said, they shouldn't be this bad this season. I think some of the things that they've done have not panned out the way they were hoping. Like letting Nick Ehlers go, I think was a bigger hit to them than they realized it was going to be. Trying to get Jonathan Toews to find some magic coming back in was a risk that they took that didn't really pan out. So whether or not he's moved to the deadline or another team tries to give him a shot, it just didn't work as they thought it was going to work. There's those injuries. They're slow. There's a lot of things going on in Winnipeg when you add them all up. Just turned into a season that you do not want to. You kind of want to write it off and go, let's just look at next year and see if we can make some other changes that work out a little bit better for us. Yeah, it's been an interesting year for the Jets. I don't think they were as good as people thought they might be, and to have them repeat as President's Trophy winners would have been a long shot. But to say that they're this bad or should be this bad again next season, I don't see that. But somewhere in the meaty middle, yeah, I think so. I think this is a team that when things line up, when injuries aren't a huge factor, when they get the pieces that they need, they're probably competing for a playoff spot, but it's just not going to be this season.
Well, Winnipeg Jets may be one of those teams looking forward to this lengthy Olympic break, as maybe they're able to collect themselves here before the rest of the season. Of course, as we head into the Olympics, with the NHL making its return to the Olympics for the first time in 12 years, safe to say there were a lot of players that missed an opportunity to represent their country on the international stage with all of those years that the NHL was not in the Olympics. Mike, when you look at the chances that they missed out on in the Winter Olympics in 2018 and 2022, when NHL players were not participating, are there any players that you look at now who you think really lost their best chance to suit up for their country during that span?
Well, even though he played in 2 Olympics, I believe Patrick Kane would have been on both of those teams for Team USA. So, he missed out on an opportunity. They finished second to Canada in 2010, and the U.S. really didn't do well in 2014. So I think he missed out on a good opportunity. The one that just screams to me is Steven Stamkos. He definitely, at least on the 2022 team, because that year he had over 100 points, he would have been on that team, and he would have been a fixture, along the lines of Crosby and McKinnon and and McDavid. So I think he missed out on an opportunity, and that it stinks for him, because I think he would have loved to have been part of this tournament 4 years ago, at least.
Jim, any players that jump out at you?
I wouldn't say necessarily jump, but I think one name that I would probably mention maybe is like a Chris Letang. There's a player there back in 2015, 16, 17, 18, when the Pittsburgh Penguins were a dynasty and they were just creaming everybody. He was a major part of that run for the Penguins when you talk about Crosby, Malkin, Letang. And now when you look at the Penguins and what's going on with that franchise and how they're all kind of winding up their careers, and Crosby's going, but Letang is watching as everybody kind of puts the final chapter in their storybook for the NHL here. He's certainly not going to get another opportunity to do it. And I think there was a time when Letang was that good a defenseman that he would have been, in the running for those teams, especially in 2018. So to say that this would have been a nice swan song for him to be able to do that as they're wrapping up their NHL careers would have been really fun. But he's certainly not at that level anymore. Back then he would have been, though.
All right. Well, the NHL is going to be taking a break as these players do head over to the Olympics, as is the Wraparound. We'll be taking a break from the show here. We will be back after the Olympics. But in the meantime, you can always head over to the Hockey News. It's been the go-to for all things hockey since 1947. 12 issues packed with game and player insights, plus a free issue to start. It's a must-have for any fan. Head to thn.com/free and grab your subscription today. That is going to do it for today's episode of the Wraparound. Thank you so much to everyone who tuned in for our final episode before the Olympic break. We do appreciate it. We will, of course, be back after the Olympics. For now, for Michael Augello and Jim Parsons, I'm Emma Lingan. This is the Wraparound, and we will see you next time.